Ladies and gentlemen, chicos, chicas, it is time for round one recap from Toronto, the candidates. And boy, we had an absolute banger of a first round. Although in the open section we had 4 draws, but nonetheless the games were super duper fun, or at least some of them. I have a lot to tell you, so without further ado, let's jump right in. Kicking off proceedings with the American derby, Fabiano against Hikaru, and the opening was already an absolute shock as Hikaru uncorked the very, very unexpected e5. The classicist in me wants to hope that you can't get away with murder in chess, but at the same time, the engines understand no concept of classical chess education, and yeah, they just prove it that e5 is very difficult to beat indeed. The idea here is that White has a very easy and optimal way to try to exploit the weakness of the light squares by inserting this check and then jumping the knight to f5. By the way, an identical idea is seen in the Keres attack, which I think is where Hikaru might have got this concept. Just a guess, because here after g4, which is the Keres attack against the Scheveningen, there is a line starting with e5. And here too, best is bishop b5, and then similar lines occur, although here bishop d7 is more popular, and then knight f5, or bishop d7 rather, excuse me, queen d7, and then knight f5, h5. And again, concrete play proves that White's positional dominance on the light squares is nowhere near as relevant as we would like to prove it. And likewise here in the game, after the immediate e5, bishop check, knight f5, the game followed an otherwise well-known and well-trodden path: bishop g5, bishop f5, ef5, bishop e7, and takes. Up to this position, we have had a fair number of Grandmaster and Elite level games. However, here things tend to branch away differently. Fabi here played castles. It appears to me that the most ambitious way to play is queen d5, and it was still played by a number of players in the past. And with the engine, I found a line that is absolutely bananas. Let's have a look. So the idea is that after castles, we can castle queenside. Now, obviously, this seems to carry an element of risk, because with the minor pieces here, the pawn storm is quite quick. Woo! Sorry if that was audible. Apparently we got a sub in the meantime, which was, by the way, a YouTube sub, so yay. Yeah, so this is how it goes: b4, knight e4, knight e4, queen e4. And by the way, more or less this is the ultimate position to demonstrate what White is hoping to prove in this line, and that is the fact that the domination on the light squares and the blockade on the light squares is going to amount to something tangible. Meanwhile, the black bishop in particular is really, really badly placed and has very limited hope to come to the fore and, you know, to be a meaningful piece. I will reflect on this, by the way, when we look at the actual game more deeply. So knight e4, queen e4, pawn a5. And a lot of people here would think that black's attack is very, very dangerous. And I don't mean to brush that idea off. But I think that if White wants to prove that there is an advantage in this variation, it is to be found in one of these variations. The engine likes h4, I do too. It restricts the bishop, occasionally may suggest an idea of g4, g5, although it's very hard to pull off. And after a4, bishop d5, rook b8, here I started looking at various ideas, and absolutely shockingly, and this just goes to show how much chess has changed in the recent years, in the past decade, as a result of computer chess. The engine shows us that the best move in this position is king d2. And it took me a fair while to understand what on earth is going on here. And right, even now I'm not sure if I understand it correctly, but I try to convey to you what I think is going on here. So, the problem with castling short here, if there ever was a problem really, is the fact that after e4, per game, by the way, the dark squared bishop becomes really, really powerful. And black usually gains enough play, and the opposite colored bishop scenarios usually tend to be very drawish. So we need to create a blockade on e4, but that's difficult to pull off without doing this queenside castle scenario, where black is forced to play b4 in order to ease the pain on d6, right? So castle threatened to take d6, and so after b4, knight e4, knight e4, queen e4 was black's way to basically relieve some of the pressure on d6 and turn white's attention instead of the pawn onto the oncoming pawn storm. However, this very pawn storm and the movement of the pawns on the queen side way too far ahead would be incredibly risky. In fact, outright bad if the king was here. Because now white would have a target and a potential easy way to create an outside pass pawn on the queen side. So incredibly enough, what transpires here, or at least that's my understanding, is that in this position, all we need to do is to secure the king on the other side of the board and then return our attention back to the queen side, play something like rook c1, c3, or something along the lines of, that idea. And we have got a beautiful game where black is completely paralyzed with this terrible bishop. And we have got all the play on the queen side, excuse me. That breathtaking idea. Absolutely fantastic stuff. Fabi, if you want my phone number and, all that stuff, if you want to hire me as a second, because I found this for you, do let me know. Back to the game, ladies and gentlemen. Back to the game. So, bishop takes f6, bishop takes f6, castles. e4. This is the difference maker. And this is a sensational move. And I would be more than surprised if this wasn't a result of home prep. As a matter of fact, I didn't check it when I prepared for this recap. I didn't look at the time consumption, but Fabi down to 122, Hikaru 153. This is definitely still home prep, 100%. 94, the engine gives it a brilliant move. It's pretty much the only legal move on the board to play. White does win the pawn, but of course we lose b2. And this is what I was talking about, that now the black bishop is becoming really active and the white pawns are split. So even if black loses an additional pawn here, especially if that pawn is d6, no biggie. Rook b1, bishop f6, queen d5. Rook c8, all good. Queen b7, rook c5 and queen a6, and there you have it. So white did manage to conquer, or rather grab an extra pawn, but this happened at the expense of activating the black army. And although I'd consider the a6 pawn far more important than the f5 one, this position now is looking very drawish. Incredibly difficult and complex to understand and play these positions well, because the opposite colored bishops really give an extra flavor to the position. It's very, very difficult to navigate what appears to be a very obvious draw and what is actually a really complex endgame scenario where, for example, the f7 pawn is a potential weakness. That was my way of saying that I'm offering limited commentary here because I honestly have no idea what's going on in regards to, for example, this being a questionable move and the engine wants to play instead queen e7, queen b5 and only then bishop c3 to ridicule the rook that can't now move upwards. This is really deep stuff. I want to get to the fun bit here, which is right here, ladies and gents. Sack the rook! The rook to win elo. You want to win elo, Levi. Oh, sorry, Hikaru, to sack the rook. And this is a beautiful demonstration of two concepts here at play that I really, really like. One is the fact that it demonstrates beautifully that with the light squared bishop, white is trying to hurt black on the light squares. And likewise, black is trying to do damage on the dark squares, having the dark squared bishop and therefore the dark squared superiority. Additionally to that, these two guys are a kilometer away from the main battlefield. And so this sack is a perfect demonstration of the king having insufficient defenders. Rook b d5 was played. Let's have a look at what happens upon accepting the sack. queen h4, and actually it is white who needs to be precise now. The only non-losing move here is king g1. King f1 would be really, really bad on account of check. King g1, bishop check. King h1, bishop e5, and all of a sudden the bishop-queen combo is just too much to handle. King g1 takes, king f1, queen h1 check, and I'm going to show you here just one model variation with simply taking the rook. If I go instead king e2, that's the model variation I wanted to show you. King e3, queen g3, check, check. And the idea is basically to try to force the king to a dark square where you can check it with the bishop so that then the rook can join, the fray with the check too. So that's where you have it. Queen d4, and now we have got a forced mate. The king goes back to e2, and the rook check means that now we have got a full army joining the party, and the checkmate is going to come like this. Beautiful idea. Queen f5 mate. That is a marvelous demonstration of forcing chess and what can happen to a king that is left alone in the wilderness. The draw, of course, is king takes f2, queen check, and then hide back on g1. And then after bishop d4, bishop e5, we have a similar scenario. But here, there is nothing better for black than to simply regain the rook. Note here the attack on the rook, the mate threat, the back rank check. This is a fair bit to deal with. White is best advised to simply ignore the hanging material. And indeed, this would result in a very similar scenario to the game. Absolute mayhem on the board. And the engine gives you 0-0 against pretty much any black move that does not leave the bishop hanging. So, after the specky rucksack, Fabiano went with rook d5. Still up a pawn, but I do think that human v human, it is objectively a brilliant chance for black to hold because of the dark squared counterplay. Once again, this is an extremely logical move instead of the engine record, which is bishop b4. Looks weird. I'm not gonna go there. This makes me feel like this is what I would have played. Thank you, Hikaru, for playing sensible chess. And we are headed toward a few trades. And Hikaru is going to pull off here a masterful idea. Note, by the way, how beautifully he follows common sense in terms of how to play opposite colored bishop scenarios, removing every single piece from light squares and placing them on dark. So the vulnerability of these pieces, in particular the king now, is essentially 0. It also moves the king out of a potential back rank check, and that becomes relevant right here, right now. Sack the rook. Again, Mr. Hikaru, a fantastic move. Hanging the rook on purpose, but of course the capture of the rook leads to an immediate perpetual check with queen e2 check, and otherwise now the pawns are disjointed and difficult to hold, and the rest was just easy peasy for Hikaru. He mowed down the pawn, and although he had to watch out, it's still not over. f7 is on, but as long as we don't lose the bishop, the king doesn't get hurt at all. The opposite colored bishops secure the draw, and said draw was agreed upon a couple of moves later. A super fascinating battle from a theoretical point of view, as well as just in general the fight and the rook f2 sack and the very active counterplay. Wow, what an introduction to the candidates for round 1. And on that note, I'm jumping into the next game right away, which we are going to analyze in detail, which is going to be none other than the youngsters. The fashion designer against the up-and-comer Indian prodigy. So this is Firouzja against Praggnanandhaa. I spent a fair bit of time about trying to figure out what was going on in this one too, because we are going to now have a look at some real heavy theory stuff. So for starters, we need to accept the fact that Queen e1, of course, is theory's #1 move in this very well-known main line of the open Ruy Lopez. The idea is obvious, the execution is weird. We want to get out of the pin, we want to be able to move the knight, and we warmly welcome this capture, which of course causes immediate trouble for black because the knight is hanging, the f4, f5 ideas are incoming. Queen d7 is a known move here with the idea of if takes, then there's a perpetual check here. But after queen e2, knight c5, f4, it's very clear that the two bishops and the easier play on white side, I think, secures at least a slight edge to white. Although d4 here is still a rough theoretical scenario. Anyway, instead of that, we had knight c5. Once again, super stock standard mainline idea. We remove the knight from harm's way and we drop it back to e6, an optimal blockader. Knight d2, knight e6, and king h1. Now, I wanted to casually just dismiss this move, but I cannot possibly create or make a recap video and pretend that king h1 is normal. So I had to dig a little bit here and figure out what was going on, because admittedly I haven't seen this idea before, and I do think that I understand very well now the move. For starters, we need to establish the fact that white wants to play knight b3. However, this move is really not good on account of takes, and bishop g5. This is the key move. What it does is that it denies f4. And now the three pawns are split apart, and they are actually indeed weak. Or I should rather say that the structure altogether is really weak. King h1 is more or less forced with the idea of bringing the rook here. But after bishop takes, rook takes, queen h4, black is in firm control of the dark squares, in particular the f4 blockade. f4, f5 is a dream, if that at all. For white, the position is not looking good at all. So, what king h1 does is that it actually prepares for this scenario. So, to some degree, it's prophylactic. But on the other hand, it has an additional threat to it, which is just absolutely bananas bonkers. And that is that if black plays some unsuspecting move, let's say castles, white has this incredible resource, knight to g1. Don't move your pieces backwards, especially if they are already developed. Now, this is the epitome of anti-chess, aka engines FTW. The idea is to play pawn f4, pawn f5, and it turns out that black is actually not very well suited to meet this idea at all, despite the apparent lead in development, excuse me. Even this position is playable, by the way, with a timely f6 break. It's very hard to believe even now for me that this could be good. But hello, this is modern opening theory. And so, it turns out that black's best response to this is to play bishop h5. And the concept is that if I drop back to g1 now, know that that's the only legal square I can go to, everywhere else I lose material. Now black has the extra move to play bishop g6. And I don't have time for f4, f5. And black takes control of the light squares. And if I take, after hg, f4, f5 looks ridiculous, it's no longer really viable because the pawn is already covering the f5 square. The h file is quite obnoxious. Black is doing great. But having played bishop h5, now we switch back to the knight b3 plan, and all of a sudden black had to lose a tempo on playing bishop h5, bishop f3. Our king is already on h1, so we won a tempo in the bishop g5 line that I highlighted as really bad for white. Now it is quite playable because we are a move ahead than where we were before. Absolute bonkers city. That, guys, is modern opening theory for you in 2024 with the help of engines on 2800 level. Absolutely unbelievable stuff. Takes. And here I'm going to skip through the middle game bit, partly because the moves are really not that exciting, and also because they lead to an absolutely sensational fireworks. So I'm going to go right there. Praggnanandhaa is playing really exciting chess here, by the way, and trying to play for a win with black, which is nothing short of awesome. Bringing up all the heavies against the damaged pawn structure on the king side. But white has his own trump cards. The e5 square glues the knight to c6. the pawn, and in general this diagonal can often become an issue, so black needs to tread with caution here as well. The key position is gonna be reached now. So in this position there were multiple ways for Praggnanandhaa to retain the balance. Absolutely chaotic, very sharp position. He opted to take f3, and this is a small inaccuracy. The engines prefer here the, not very ambitious queen f6 holding the fort, or queen h5, queen f2, queen f7 with a very exciting repetition. Nai, says Praggnanandhaa. He goes in for the kill with rook f3, knight c5. Now things are getting absolutely crazy. So the knight, of course, is immune to capture because rook e8, immediately wins the queen and the game. That's see you later, alligator. And so now there is a tension building on e6. Now this, according to the machine, is best dealt with by simply playing knight f8. But Praggnanandhaa knows better than his opponent when it comes to going backwards with knights. Or worse. Actually knows worse than that. He goes forward, and this is a slight mistake according to the engine, and this is where the game could have turned absolute crazy city. At first I will show you what happened in the game. Firouzja took on e6, which essentially is a draw offer, because now after queen takes g4, knight g5, in order to stop the back rank mate, black is virtually forced to sack the knight on either of these squares. The idea is to try to lure the rook away from the defense of the pawn on h2, and after the sacrifice, sack the rook, we have got a perpetual check, which is how the game ended. But actually Pragg opted to sack the knight on e5, makes no difference. I can't take with the pawn because that hangs the knight, and then black is up in exchange, and after rook e5 the same perpetual check occurred. However, here after queen h5, white had the insane idea of rook e g2. Well, actually that's not that insane, it's very logical. Now the knight is still immune to capture because there is a beautiful checkmate attack incoming with the heavies. Mate. And so after rook e g2, black needs to do something about the g7 pawn, or go on a full-on onslaught with knight e5. This knight e5 sec appears to be the bread and butter of the position. It's quite unbelievable that on almost all occasions the knight is hanging by at least 2 pieces, and yet white needs to navigate the position with utmost care. Queen e5 immediately allows a mate in 2, just to give you one example of how this can get real dicey. The challenge is, what happens if we take with the pawn? Now black plays queen f7, and now the threat is rook f1. And here too, I tried a few things for white, and boy did I get burnt very easily. So rook f1 can be stopped by bishop d3 and rook g1. Rook g1 loses on the spot to the sensational idea of rook f2, rook g2, rook takes h2, checkmate. I'm not gonna say sack the rook again, but yep, imagine I did. And now after king takes, we have got a breathtaking checkmate like so. Hello. Or we can have a somewhat less breathtaking, but nonetheless beautiful scenario, winning the queen, picking off the knight, and landing in a winning position for black. I would like to highlight here that after the check king f8, we can't pin the queen because we are already pinned ourselves. And due to the peculiar position of the white king, the passive rooks, black is winning here. So the only way after fe queen f7 for white to prove a slight advantage is to play bishop d3, denying rook f1. And after knight takes c5, which is forced because otherwise black is simply a piece down for nothing, we cash in on this rook g7 idea, as now we have this beautiful double attack on the knight and king. But even that doesn't quite cut it because of rook d3. And I stopped the analysis here after queen takes c7. Slightly better for white, but I think objectively speaking, this still would fizzle out to a draw. But boy, this could have been a lot of fun if the players had opted to go down this path. In particular, Firouzja with this Rook G2 idea wasn't played, but this would have been absolute fireworks. And by the way, once again, to play chess like this in round 1 of the candidates, shout out to both of these kids. Like, this is just next level stuff. Even though 96 was played, which was essentially a draw offer, but what a draw it was. Speaking of draws, Nepo and the Gukesh game was also drawn, but I'm going to spare you from those because that was fairly uneventful. And yeah, actually I will show you a brief, just a very brief insight into the Gukesh Vidit match. Very sharp Tarash that ended up in a incredible position. Here Vidit played bishop g4, which by the way according to the engine is an inaccuracy. A crazy cool idea to sack the bishop in order to obtain immediate play on the open file with the heavies, and white is dead lost here, like beyond repair. Knight e4, rook a2, and white is completely lost on account of the unbearable pressure on the pins. The only correct move after bishop g4 appears to be bishop c3, and then we have got a forced draw by repetition. Yeah, very interesting battle, but it came to a rather sudden end. I think that this is all theoretically worked out, and I'm pretty sure that both of these boys had this at home already on their board, so I just wanted to show you this bishop g4 move because that was really cool. And the Nepo game was a fairly dry draw too. And with that, I'm going to just very quickly move on to the ladies section very briefly. The only decisive game there was the encounter between Lei Tingjae and Tan Zhongyi. Hope I pronounced that correctly. An interesting game. It started off with a stock standard Carlsbad. Amazingly enough, after bishop g4, queen c2, castles h3 and bishop e6, more or less we are already on uncharted territory. Although typically in these scenarios with the Carlsbad, the understanding of the structure is more relevant than the very, very precise move orders. Well, take that with a pinch of salt, but you get my gist. And we ended up in this very peculiar position that at first sight it looks like white is calling all the shots, but it's a very deceptive picture. As soon as we castle, the black counterplay with the queen already being present on the king side is going to amount to at least some very annoying counterplay. Lei Tingjae played a few moves that I wouldn't want to say I didn't understand, but I thought made less sense to me than the alternatives. For example, here, to me, king h2 makes more sense because it shields the king better against a potential sack later on here, and you will see why that's relevant when we play out the game scenario. So take stakes. She's playing all the right moves by strategy, but not necessarily by precise calculation, because here after rook e6, it turns out that black has mounted a really nasty attack on the king side, which is what they are meant to do. And a couple of, or rather one inaccuracy is gonna be enough. That is right there, the move by the way, to turn the tide completely and start the king side attack with queen h4, which wasn't played by the way. And all of a sudden, bishop takes h3 is a game-winning threat. And now white's only move is king h2, which is why I was promoting the idea of king h2, and I don't understand these positions deeply enough to make claims that this would have been better than that, but I couldn't find a downside to king h2. And so after king h2 comes rook f6, and now again bishop takes h3 is super dirty. And white is struggling here to hold the king side together. A textbook example, by the way, by Tan Zhongyi about how to play the king side attack part of the Carlsbad structure with black. So the game continued with h5. This is also sensible often while black uncorks a bishop g4 sack. Queen c7 played, queen h4 played. Again, the threat is bishop takes h3. And after queen f4, yeah, this was not entirely necessary because it turns out that rook a c1 is a move here. And if I take, then queen h2. Wow. This line is absolutely bonkers. It feels like both sides are completely dead lost. I can't move the bishop away without losing the queen, but I also cannot take the bishop because f3 is hanging. And I also cannot move the bishop away. Actually, I can, but then comes this check. A completely insane idea with a perpetual check coming from e4. Wow. Turns out that there was a lot more to this game too than what met the eye. Obviously, f3 is very risky because of queen takes. So king h3, queen f5, king back, queen check is the way to go according to the machine. None of this was played, but queen f4, trying to eliminate all kingside attack, cost late Inge a pawn, and that pawn proved to be the deciding factor. Note that g3 always loses h3. And after dealing with all the threats, Tang Zongji simply mopped up the pawn and went on to win. Ladies and gents, that's gonna be it. It was a very long-winded recap, but frankly, I don't see the point of just running through the games without thorough explanations. And frankly, I learned an awful lot while preparing the recap, in particular about the Open Spanish variation. So that was very well worth my time, and I hope that you feel the same. I hope to cover as much as I can, but I will be traveling halfway through the tournament, in fact even a little bit earlier, but as long as I'm around, I will be doing the recaps, so please join me on this journey. Super fun tournament, can't wait to see the remaining rounds. So yeah, please don't forget to chuck a like, potentially a sub if you haven't been subbing to my channel yet, and super thank me if you can, much appreciated. And I will be back with the next recap tomorrow. Thanks for watching.